In the glossy version of Los Angeles that gets plastered on billboards and sold in Hollywood dreams, you'd never guess the city has a violent, carefully concealed history of forcing black families out of their homes. It wasn't always police raids or bulldozers. Sometimes it was fire. Sometimes it was paperwork written to confuse. Other times it was silence, complicity, and the kind of neighborhood sabotage that leaves no fingerprints. LA loves to sell itself as this melting pot where anyone can come and build a future, but that promise was never equally offered. Black families who managed to build wealth and property in LA weren't just met with resistance, they were actively erased. Some by fire, some by law, some by force. The goal was the same: get them out and make it look like progress. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a long-running pattern, one that shaped the way LA looks today and continues to define where opportunity lives and where it's quietly smothered. One of the clearest examples of this is what happened to Sugar Hill. Back in the 1940s, Sugar Hill was one of the only areas where successful black families could buy large, elegant homes in a decent neighborhood. These weren't rentals or government projects. These were beautiful, well-maintained houses purchased outright by doctors, lawyers, business owners, musicians, people who'd worked hard and saved harder to finally give their families something stable. It was a community filled with dignity and ambition. But as soon as Sugar Hill started gaining a positive reputation, white residents nearby panicked. They didn't see families, they saw invasion. They organized and weaponized real estate laws, dragging black homeowners into court over restrictive covenants, even though those racial restrictions had already been ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. It wasn't about law, it was about control. It was about white people deciding that black wealth was fine in theory, but not if it lived next door. Then you had South Central, which today is often unfairly associated with gangs and violence. But back then, it was one of the few havens for black families who had fled the Jim Crow South looking for opportunity in California. These weren't people looking to stir up trouble. They were veterans returning from war, laborers building planes, women working long hours in factories, all looking for safety and stability. Over time, they built churches, schools, small businesses, real community. But the city refused to support it. They denied home loans. They let the roads crumble. They underfunded the schools and ignored infrastructure problems. And worse, there were homes that burned under suspicious circumstances, again and again, with no suspects, no investigations, no urgency to find out what had really happened. Fires that started too conveniently after a family moved in. Explosions that came shortly after a black homeowner refused to sell. These weren't coincidences. They were quiet, unspoken strategies to keep South Central from becoming too successful, too proud, too visible. The most calculated and permanent blow came during the freeway era, especially with the construction of the 10 freeway in the 1950s and 60s. Officials and urban planners needed a route to connect downtown LA with Santa Monica, and they had options. But instead of running the freeway through affluent white areas that had political influence and money to fight back, they drove it straight through the heart of working-class black neighborhoods. These were not empty lots. These were communities with homes, corner stores, playgrounds, and lives. Entire blocks were seized under eminent domain, which sounds legal and clean, but in practice was brutal. Families were told to leave, often with little to no compensation, and given almost no help finding new places to go. They were made to feel like their communities didn't matter, like their routes could be paved over without a second thought. And once the freeway was finished, their old addresses became exit ramps and sound walls, with no trace that a vibrant black community had ever existed there at all. And then there's the part that almost no one talks about: the bombings. Yes, literal bombings in Los Angeles. In the 1950s and 60s, when black families started trying to buy homes in formerly all-white neighborhoods like Compton, Hawthorne, or parts of the Valley, they were met not just with protests or slurs, but with outright terrorism. Dynamite was thrown through windows, fires were set in garages, crosses were burned on front lawns, the same tactics used by the Klan in the South. And often, the police didn't come to help. In some cases, they came to arrest the black homeowner for causing a disturbance. These families weren't just targeted, They were abandoned by the systems that were supposed to protect them. And yet, many stayed. They rebuilt. They refused to leave, but the scars stayed too. And in some cases, neighbors who didn't commit the crime still made it clear every day in smaller ways. Cold shoulders, dirty looks, suddenly unavailable babysitters, calls to zoning boards over made-up violations, that these families were not welcome. Even in Baldwin Hills, which is now celebrated as the Black Beverly Hills, the early days were full of pushback. Developers resisted building for black buyers. Realtors flat out refused to show them homes. Insurance companies mysteriously dropped policies once a sale went through. And then, more fires. Homes under construction caught fire overnight. Signs were torn down. Mailboxes smashed. It was a campaign of intimidation without fingerprints. No one to charge, no one to blame. Just 1,000 small acts meant to say, "Don't get comfortable here." But people did stay, and they built Baldwin Hills anyway. And it remains a symbol of Black resilience. But the fact that it exists at all is proof of how hard Black Angelenos had to fight just to live in peace, and how much money, time, and security was lost in that fight. On top of all that, eminent domain continued to be used like a scalpel, slicing Black neighborhoods out of the city's landscape in the name of progress. One of the most striking examples of this was in and around Chavez Ravine. While the Mexican-American displacement there is better known, it's less talked about that parts of the surrounding area also housed Black and Asian American families who were quietly pushed out during the Dodger Stadium land grab. These were multi-generational homes, passed down, improved over time, rich in culture and history. And yet, when the city wanted the land, the families were bulldozed off it. No headlines, no compensation worth mentioning, no public outcry. Just a letter, a knock at the door, and the knowledge that nothing you built would be remembered. All of this, the fires, the bombings, the forced sales, the freeway displacements, weren't random. They were strategic. They were designed to fracture Black stability before it could grow into generational wealth. And it worked. Families that could have built equity and passed down property instead had to start from zero, again and again. They lost homes. They lost schools. They lost neighbors and support networks and safety. The people who orchestrated this destruction didn't need to wear hoods or carry torches. They wore suits. They sat on planning commissions. They signed paperwork in quiet rooms. And they relied on the fact that few people would question why so many Black neighborhoods kept disappearing. You can still see the damage today. It's in the home ownership gap between white and Black Angelenos. It's in the way public investment still flows disproportionately toward wealthier white areas, while Black neighborhoods fight for basic services. It's in the wealth gap, the education gap, the health gap, all of which are rooted in decades of forced displacement and theft. The land was taken, but so was the future, and LA has never fully admitted that. Most people drive on the 10 every day without knowing what was there before. Most people see Baldwin Hills and don't realize how close it came to being burned out before it ever began. And that's why these stories matter, because you can't fix a city by pretending its wounds were accidents.